The order of Orangeville Town Council. We've got a public meeting tonight. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor?
Yes.
Any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Ms. Porman-Cherry, could we have our national anthem, please?
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you to David Nairn, the Artistic Director of Theatre Orangeville, for that rendition of our national anthem. We would like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa of the Three Fires Confederacy. Tonight's meeting is a statutory public meeting, and as per our normal protocol, the Deputy Mayor is going to chair the balance of this meeting. Deputy Mayor McIntosh, I'll turn the chair over to you, sir.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tonight we'll be going through items 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3 in regards to 4852 Broadway. So this is a procedure we'll be following tonight. Anyone who would like to speak to this matter is to call 1-289-801-5774 and enter conference ID number 461-085-195#. Callers will be invited to provide their questions or comments following the conclusion of the presentations. Any member of the public connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Please remain muted until the chair requests comments or questions from the public. Anyone who wants to be notified of further consideration on this topic to submit their name, phone number, mailing address, and email address to planning@orangeville.ca or call 519-941-0440, extension 2254. Reference the file OPZ-2022-01. Please note any information collected is a matter of public record. And we'll now turn it over to Larissa Russell, our Senior Planner.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm going to share my screen. Everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Good evening, Your Worship, members of Council, and those in attendance. Tonight's public meeting is being held in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to share information about the applications with Council and members of the public, to obtain any comments and answer any questions. A recommendation or decision on the applications will not be made tonight. An information report has also been included on this evening's agenda and provides more detail about the applications. The applicant and agents are also in attendance and will be providing more detail as part of their presentation. They will also be available to answer any specific questions raised by Council and members of the public. The official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications were filed by Burnside on behalf of Moksh Developments on January 6, 2022, and deemed complete by the town on January 26, 2022. The application is proposing the development of a 7-story mixed-use building containing 129 residential units and 408 square meters of ground floor retail space. The subject lands are located on the south side of Broadway between 3rd Street and 4th Street. They are municipally known as 48, 50, 50A, and 52 Broadway. They have a combined lot area of approximately 0.96 hectares with approximately 139 meters of frontage along Broadway. They are accessible from Broadway via existing driveways and are currently developed with an auto body shop and parking area. The property is surrounded by a mix of residential and commercial uses, as well as open space conservation uses to the south that are associated with Mill Creek. As mentioned, the proposed development consists of a 7-story building fronting onto Broadway. A total of 129 residential units are proposed with 408 square meters of ground floor retail. There is a mix of unit types, including 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, ranging in size from 54 square meters to 98 square meters. A total of 200 parking spaces are proposed, consisting of 146 resident parking spaces, 33 visitor parking spaces, and 21 retail parking spaces. They are provided through a combination of surface parking and 3 underground parking levels. Access to the proposed development is via 2 driveway entrances onto Broadway. At this time, the proposed building footprint and required parking are proposed to be wholly contained within 48 and 50 Broadway. Should underground parking not be feasible, additional surface parking would be provided on 50A and 52 Broadway in conjunction with the proposed development. The applicant will provide further details as part of their presentation. The subject lands are currently designated service commercial in the Town of Orangeville official plan with site-specific policy E8.62. This designation permits a range of commercial uses as listed on the slide. Site-specific policy E8.62 removes permissions for automotive uses, such as automobile parking depots, dealerships, and used car lots. The intent of this policy is to reinforce and complement the focus of the East Side Broadway area as the gateway into town and entry into the Downtown Heritage Conservation District, and to continue the town's efforts to beautify this area. In order to permit the development, an official plan amendment is required. The official plan amendment proposes to redesignate the property from service commercial to neighborhood commercial with a special policy area. The neighborhood commercial designation permits residential uses on upper floors and a range of commercial uses at grade. Similar to the OP, the subject property is zoned service commercial in the Orangeville zoning bylaw. It also permits a range of commercial uses as shown on the slide. A zoning bylaw amendment is required to permit this development. Similar to the official plan amendment, the zoning bylaw amendment proposes to rezone the properties as neighborhood commercial with site-specific provision and open space conservation. Site-specific provisions are required for a front yard setback of 1 meter, reductions to interior side yards, and to permit residential uses on the ground floor at the rear of the building. The proposed 23-meter height is permitted by the current C3 zoning and would be carried over into the proposed C2 zoning. We've circulated the applications to internal and external agencies for comment. These are the agencies and comments that have expressed no concern. We've received detailed comments from some of the internal departments. Being planning, we'll be requiring a peer review of the urban design report. Transportation and development will be requiring a peer review of the transportation study. And CVC has also provided their comments, which require revisions to several technical reports to add additional details that they require. and they've also noted that a CBC permit will be required for the development. When preparing this presentation, we hadn't received any formal comments from the public. Today we held the statutory public meeting. In terms of next steps, we will await a revised submission from the applicant for review and comment, and in the future we will prepare a recommendation report for a council decision. That's everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Larissa. We'll now have a presentation by Deborah Walker from MHBC. Deborah?
Hi, hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Just getting up my notes here. So I'm I'm Deborah Walker. I'm with MHBC as well. I've got some other representatives from the team here with me tonight. Peter Bruce from Burnside, who Burnside completed all of the technical reports that went in with the submission, and also representatives from ACE Architecture and the owner as well. Largely tonight, we're here to listen. We're here to receive comments from the public and from council. We'll take everything back and then we'll consider those comments as we work through responses to the comments that we will get, we anticipate to get from the technical agencies and from the peer reviewers. I'll just start to share my screen. I got my presentation. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, and I'll just, in the interest, I don't want to have you there till 10 o'clock. So I'm going to try to get through a lot of this and try not to be repetitive with what Larissa has already presented. So I'll just kind of go through everything and just point out a few highlights as well that you may find of interest. So the one thing that I did want to point out, Larissa did note that some of the redesignations. So just to be clear that the lands subject to the proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment have to do with the area that's in yellow, I'll call it. It's kind of a beige color within the overall property limits. And the actual developable proposed development site is actually in this blue and pink dash line. The blue line representing the development site, the pink line is representing the 31-meter meander belt line, which also includes a 6-meter setback. So everything south of that line, all of this will be developed. And as you can see, this is all of the treed area. And it actually includes a little bit of the existing gravel parking area at the back. So that's for 48 and 50. For 50A and 52, we have looked at just literally the amendments would allow for the recognition of the parking area, which is up in this area, right up near Broadway. And it would essentially, should it become identified through the detailed design that we can't go as far down as we'd like for the underground parking, this area would provide additional parking area for surface parking. But we're hopeful that we will be able to have the technical reports completed to show that we can go further down. When the geotechnical was completed, it was completed based on 6 stories and 1 level of underground parking. So that report is being updated, and that will all be reviewed by the staff through this review as well. So I just wanted to point that out. As well for the proposal, as you can see, it is in close proximity to the Central Business District limit. And as well, recently the 60 Broadway in the blue here was also approved for mixed use development, which also extended this Central Business District a little bit towards this property. The proposal essentially will allow for to provide more additional and more attainable housing options for residents living in the town or who may want to move to Orangeville. which is certainly becoming an increasingly feasible possibility with more businesses allowing work from home and that kind of thing. So it would allow for some smaller housing unit options, maintenance-free housing options, close to downtown and amenities and that kind of thing. And as you can see from this figure, that there is, as you're probably aware, lots of different recreational space and that kind of thing, as well as the service commercial amenities that are right in the area. Currently, the property is used as a auto service and repair facility. As part of the phase 1 and 2 environmental site assessment, it did identify that there is some contamination from that former use. And just want to be clear that the owner will be required to remediate the site as part of the redevelopment in order to meet provincial standards that would be required to support any residential land use on this property. And as you can see from the photos here, that there's really a large amount of unutilized space on this site, large gravel areas, lots of storage, outside storage and that kind of thing that will be cleaned up with the redevelopment. And it really has the potential to accommodate a much greater use and benefit the community overall. So the official plan amendment, really, I won't go through all of these. A lot of this stuff has already been mentioned by Larissa, but essentially it will allow for a mixed-use building with the ground floor retail and a range of apartment units on the upper stories, as well as a few apartment units on the ground floor at the rear of the building. This is the elevation that would be just, again, it's very conceptual at this point, and details of the elevations and that kind of thing will be addressed further through site plan control. But it does give you a general idea of sort of the look and massing that we were looking at. And also just the renderings are showing how we've tried to break up the facade, kind of providing a bit more of a modern to also also complementing the traditional architecture in Orangeville. So it's kind of it's recognizing the service commercial uses and the transition as a gateway into the traditional heritage district that's further along on Broadway. The height, as Larissa pointed out, it respects the 23-meter height limit that is currently in place for the zoning on this property, which does allow for 7 stories. And you can see from this elevation is the east elevation, and in this case, this would be looking up. This is Mill Creek on this side, so the underground parking would be located. The ramp is in this location, and then there you can see some of the units are in the back and an outdoor amenity area. And the sets, there would be some step back for the 7th story, and you can see that there would be space for plantings and planters and that kind of thing, and terraces that can be landscaped as well. In the this is from the west elevation, so this would be Broadway, and you can see we've incorporated a step back as well from the 6th to the 7th story. The south elevation, so this is looking at from Mill Creek. As you may recall from the site plan, it's kind of an L-shaped building. So you're looking at from the Mill Creek. This is this small portion of the building that would come closer to the ravine, and the majority of the building would be pushed up against Broadway. Oops, sorry. So the proposed redevelopment of the property, this site in particular actually is subject to a site-specific policy that is in the official plan. And it speaks to the intent of the policy is to reinforce and complement the focus of the East Broadway area as the easterly gateway into town and the entry into the downtown Heritage Conservation District, and the town's continuing efforts to beautify this area. It is anticipated that over time, specific proposals for amendments to the zoning bylaw and redevelopment proposals will be made in accordance with this policy, so as to have the effect of relocating automotive and automotive-related uses that rely on the outdoor storage and display of motor vehicles and equipment to more appropriate areas of the downtown. So really what this proposal is doing is implementing this site-specific policy with what we think is a vibrant mixed-use development proposal. And as, I don't know if you can read this, but it's very just really the technical parts of the amendment, which is, as I mentioned before, it's really to redesignate the portions that were within the development limit to the neighborhood commercial special policy area. And then some of the portions in here that you can see in this area, these are actually redesignating the lands to conservation. And then there's the small little part up here, that is right along Broadway, and that's to deal with the parking area that I mentioned. So really the proposed official plan amendment is the main objectives are to implement the site-specific policy of E8.62 that I just read to you. Also, it allows for the mixed-use building with the ground floor retail and the residential uses in the ground floor at the rear. And also it sets out the permitted uses that would be appropriate for a mixed-use building in this area. And it also refines, as I mentioned, the environmental corridor. So it's actually increasing the environmental, the lands that are designated for conservation. And it would allow for consistent designation. So it would allow for the site-specific neighborhood commercial designation on both the 48 and 50, as well as the 50A and 52 Broadway properties. Again, similar to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. As you can see, the property includes a much broader area, but really the amendments are the parts that are focused further up towards Broadway. And then the areas it's actually designating lands to conservation to protect those areas based on the detailed studies that were completed with the environmental impact study and that are currently being reviewed by the Conservation Authority. And the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, really, again, it implements the site-specific policies, and it would allow for the retail uses on the ground floor and then dwelling units on the upper floors and on the ground floor, not fronting though on Broadway. If any dwelling units are on the ground floor there, they would be at the rear of the building towards Mill Creek. And as Larissa had pointed out, I won't get in, this is getting pretty technical, but essentially we are, for the most part, we are following the service commercial zone. And in some cases, the neighborhood commercial where it's appropriate. And as well for the parking, we have applied the central business district zone parking, which is 1 parking space per unit for residents plus 0.25 parking spaces per unit for visitors. And that is everything here. Larissa's really already covered. And the only thing that I would also just mention is some of the technical reports, just for the benefit. I'm not sure that was mentioned. So we have completed the transportation study, which has been, which includes a parking analysis as well. And that report will be peer reviewed. And as well, the geotechnical report has been prepared by Burnside, and it will be is currently being updated, and then also will be reviewed by staff and agencies. A hydrogeological report, a functional servicing report that looks at water, sanitary connections, stormwater, erosion and sediment control during construction. As well, there's been a noise assessment as well that looks at proposed mitigation, really just to deal with the noise generated from Broadway. And there's been a phase 1 and 2 environmental site assessment that I mentioned, and the arborist report that looks at which trees would be preserved and which ones would be removed. And as well, there would be a landscape plan, and a lot of this detail would be design matters, landscape plan matters, with those kinds of things would be dealt further on in the planning process through the site plan control. There was also an urban design brief that was submitted, which will also be peer reviewed. And that is the extent of my presentation.
Okay, thank you. We have some couple of questions from councillors. Councillor Sherwood, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you to Ms. Walker, on page 12 of your slide, if you perhaps wouldn't mind putting that back up, I do have a question with regard to some arrows seem to be pointing. If I looked at the left side of the screen, the arrows seem to be pointing to the same section with two different types of changing of so am I like you?
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to
the
zoom
arrow
in
on the left
so you
looks
can
like
see
it's
it. Yeah.
Is that right? Like that you're trying to change that one spot to two different designations?
Oh, this one right here?
Over to the left, like the little square part. Yeah, like the arrow, that arrow and the one above is pointing to the same parcel, right?
So what they're showing is this portion on this property is going to be lands to be designated from service commercial. A little honeycomb.
I think I lost it.
Can you see it?
I just can't hear you, that's all.
Oh,
You cut out. Yeah.
Okay. So you're not looking at making two redesignations in that little square. It's okay. I see the pine cone and then the
yeah,
horizontal.
it gets technical because some of there's different properties and different designations that we have to go from and to. But at the end of the day, the part that's shown in this honeycomb, if you can sort of see that, and then there's two little scraps over here. These are going from a designation to open space conservation. So all of that's open space conservation, and so is that and that. That's what's proposed.
And
Everything.
and those redesignation changes, as you suggested in your report, would allow excess parking if needed.
That's only this part here. You see this? Then there's like a checkerboard up in this area.
Mm-hmm.
That would be where, you know, where the existing parking area is.
Mm-hmm.
It would only be for that area.
Okay.
And then, yeah, and so nothing is really changing. We've included it in case we have to tie it to these lands as part of, if we need the excess parking, then it could be tied to this, because it is on a separate property.
Thank you for the clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Good evening, Ms. Walker.
Hi.
Appreciate all the information that you've provided this evening. I don't want to take too much time, and I know my fellow councillors have a variety of questions as well, but I'm going to focus on something that you highlighted throughout your presentation a couple of times, which is the EV assessments. Phase 1, phase 2, knowing that property fairly well over a number of decades, there have been predominantly automotive type businesses there. And so no doubt there would be some form of contamination in the land. It has been recognized. Is it premature to maybe ask what that remediation of the land would be at this point? And would that potentially, could it affect the topography and also the Mill Creek itself?
So I don't know if I can try to answer that question. I don't know if Peter, you are on the line, if you're able to, because it's kind of getting into a little bit of a technical part. And I want to make sure you get the right information.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Okay.
So basically everything everything would be removed, any of the contamination that we've identified. And part of that, part and parcel, when you're doing underground parking, you're digging a big hole anyway. So all the materials will be excavated for the parking would be moved to a licensed receiving site to clean the entire property up. So there's been a few areas that have been identified around the property that we've done sampling. We've been monitoring the groundwater for over a year now. So we do have a good handle on the extent of the contamination, and the phase 2 has an outline of how that will be dealt with and how it can be remediated, and it will be removed off site and disposed of. It has to go to a licensed receiver.
All right, that's appreciated for that question at this time. I'll pose another question if I have some time. I know my other members of council have some questions to pose as well right now.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. I've got 2 quick questions. The first one will be, I think, through you to Ms. Russell. There is a lot of development proposed in that kind of general area. So this is not specific to just this one development. But is there a plan from the town of Orangeville right now to deal with the increased traffic that extra population would bring, with the new development being built at Wellington, the new proposed one on the Angels Diner site, and now this proposed development? That's a significant increase to the population of that one section of Broadway, which is already quite a populated, busy area of town. So I'm just curious how we will manage the flow of the traffic and how that will be looked at, because from what I'm understanding, there's 2 entrances that are both on Broadway for this development as well. So that would kind of be question number 1. And question number 2 is potentially to Ms. Walker, which would be kind of a similar follow-up question. I see that there's 2 entrances proposed from Broadway, but I also see that kind of the back end of the property abuts against Front Street and Amanda Street. Will there be entrances into this development from that area as well, from that residential area? So those are my 2 questions. So probably to Ms. Russell first.
Through the chair to Councillor Post. So yes, we understand that there are several developments going into this area. In terms of the traffic that's being generated from it, we are having all of the studies peer reviewed, and our peer reviewer is considering all of the previous development approvals and factoring in those calculations and traffic counts as part of the review of any applications coming forward to ensure that the traffic along Broadway is still within a manageable and reasonable operating capacity.
Okay, great. And perhaps Ms. Walker for the second question.
Yep, no problem. So it is just the 2 entrances off of Broadway that you are that you've highlighted. There would be no other entrance into the property. So there's no crossing of any of Mill Creek or any of that environmental feature. That will be completely protected.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you, Councillor Post. Councillor Peters.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you to Ms. Russell. I know you probably won't have this off the top of your head, but perhaps you could look it up. Do you happen to know the curb-to-curb width of Broadway at that section? And where I'm going with this, and it's sort of part of the bigger picture here as we see more and more mid-rise buildings going up along Broadway, is that sort of height to width ratio of buildings to streets. And there's a lot of work that's been done in that subject in terms of walkable streets and complete streets, and just hoping to figure out where this one lands within those ratios.
Yes, through the chair. I don't know the exact number. I can look it up unless somebody else on the call knows it off the top of their head.
Yeah, we don't have to figure it out right now. I just think it's important.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure either, but we can certainly answer that question, and we can provide that information.
Yeah, and if I could, just to allude to sort of the next step there, if if we're at one end of the spectrum or the other with some of those ratios, there may hopefully be the potential. I see you've stepped the top floor back slightly, but even one additional step in terms of the aesthetics and the feel from ground level will be very important for this development, because right now it's all 1 and 2 story, and this is going to be a big change. So you see it often in more dense urban settings where you step back some of those floor plates. I understand that removes some floor area and affects the pro forma, but we're going to have to balance that.
As the town, are there urban design guidelines that would be, like, are you working on those that dictate that? Which you're working towards?
So I can answer that. We have some old outdated urban design guidelines, but as part of the CIP that we're moving forward and is being, I guess, reviewed today as part of this public meeting, we will be looking at implementing some townwide urban design policies that we can then implement through that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Peters. Mayor Brown.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just glad to see some underground parking. I think that makes the aesthetics of the development a lot better for me personally. Just wondering, has there been any talk with town staff about perhaps a trail that might go on the property to the south of Mill Creek? And has that been discussed, Mr. Ward or perhaps Ms. Walker? Has there been any discussion about that land?
Through you, Chair, I can certainly at least pipe in that there has been we haven't received that comment, but we can certainly take it back.
Right. And just to clarify, you've got 39% of landscaped open space. That would include the land to the south of Mill Creek, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and there's no intention to develop that land then?
No. It is all within the floodplain. It would not be developable.
Right, and following up on Councillor Peters' words, I like the idea of texture and setback, and we'd shared that previously. But you know, the setback of the top floor is nice, and you know how it looks from ground level also would be nice if there was some setbacks. And I certainly like the balconies and terraces. Nice to have some outdoor space for the tenants of that building. But thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you again, Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Very quickly, Ms. Walker, what type of research was conducted to determine the ratio of units that are proposed? You have a number of 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3.
That would be more for the owner, because they were they created the architectural plans with the owner. Coben, I don't know if you're on if you want to speak to that.
We were developing a unit mix based on essentially sort of efficiencies and what we could get in the development. The mix is flexible. The mix is reflective of affordability, attainable pricing and sizing. So that was the driver in our mix, in our current mix to date.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Okay. Mayor Brown, do you have another question or?
No, I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor. Let me take my hand down. I apologize.
No problem. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I don't know if the timing to ask this question is now or during the staff report, so I'll put it on the table and somebody can guide me. I see that this proposal doesn't reach the 1.5 parking requirement. The 1.5 parking always has boggled my mind in the Planning Act, but the planning people seem to understand it better than I never thought that 1.5 was never enough, and I see this proposal as only 1. So is there any particular reason why, if you don't have that excess land going west, that you accommodate it so that we at least get to the 1.5 parking requirement per unit? Is that a question now or later?
I think, so speaking from ACE's perspective, I think that is a question for later. I think that we would want to have some consultation with a transportation specialist on our side to help with some rationale and some backup on maybe what we'd be proposing in the future.
So Mr. Chair, might you bring this up during the staff report then?
Sounds like that's the way to go.
Okay.
Yeah. Councillor Peters.
I was going to say, if I may jump in.
Yes, go ahead.
We can just take that back as a comment, Councillor Sherwood, just given that we're at a public meeting today and we're collecting comments. So if you have a comment that we take it back, that we look at additional parking, then that's what we can do. So we can discuss that now, or it's all part of the same discussion.
Follow up, Mr. Chair, just to make it clear, I'm just trying to justify that we get to the 1.5, which is the minimum amount. I see that there's land available, and I'm not saying that they necessarily use that land only if they can't keep going underground. I think we need to reach that target, especially when I see some land that can be used for that. So whether it's above ground or below ground, I don't care. I'm just trying to get to the 1.5. Thank you.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I don't think this will come as a surprise, but I like that it was being reduced to 1.25. I live very close to that area, and you know, I don't think a two-car household makes a lot of sense in a mid-rise on the main street in what is still a relatively small town. As we work on our transit and our walkability, maintaining that land for open space is far more useful in my mind. So I'll support the 1.25 if we want to have that comment on the record as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peters. Somehow I knew you would comment on that. We'll now move to the public questions. So if we have any questions or comments from the public regarding this matter, anybody connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Is there anyone from the public wishing to ask a question? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to a motion. Madam Clerk, are we just making a motion to receive this?
Yes, that would be fine. Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a motion to receive? Councillor Taylor, Councillor Andrews, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 8.4. Anyone who would like to speak to this matter, please call 1-289-801-5774 and enter conference ID number 461-085-195#. Callers will be invited to provide their questions or comments following the conclusion of the meeting presentation. Any member of the public connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Please remain muted until the chair requests comments or questions from the public. Anyone who wants to be notified of further consideration on this topic, please submit their name, phone number, mailing address, and email address to planning@orangeville.ca or call 519-941-0440, extension 2254, and reference Draft Community Improvement Plan. Note any information collected is a matter of public record. So we now have a presentation by Mr. John Hicks from Sierra Planning and Management. Mr. Hicks.
Good evening, thank you. I will share my screen. I'll just put it on display. Can you see that full screen?
Yes.
Great. So with me this evening, just in terms of the team, my colleague Asia from our office at Sierra is on the call as well, and then also from MHBC, Andrea Sinclair, one of the partners of MHBC, undertook to oversee the development of the urban design guidelines. Those are the guidelines that under the previous public meeting matter were referenced. So we're going to give an overview of that as well. So what I'll do is just go through our process of where we are now. The CIP is a little bit of a It's a lengthy process because of the consultation requirements. I'll explain for the benefit of members of the public what the nature of the document is, meaning it is something that is provided for under legislation. I'll then provide a description of each of the programs that we have developed, as well as some of the rationale for these programs. And then finally give an outline of what are the next steps going forward to allow council to render a decision on this. So in terms of where we are, in undertaking any community improvement plan, it's very important that the plan is not a generic document. You see lots of municipalities have community improvement plans. Those that do them well, and there are many places that do have successful plans, have taken the time to make sure that the program suite for financial incentives to assist development and rejuvenation in some cases of their communities meets the specific needs of the properties and business groups and the general resident base in those areas. And likewise, that's very much what we have done here with this piece of work. So we started, getting on for about 11 months ago, and it is the nature of these things that that we have touch points all the way through in terms of consultation. So we've done a lot of background review and stakeholder discussion, including focus groups, property owners survey, and also it was a survey that could be filled out if you were a business tenant of commercial and industrial properties. And we continued to have internal discussions as well with the various departments of the town. In drafting the plan, we've created that and created an implementation strategy, and are seeking comment from a couple of agencies, well, one agency being the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And just a note for everyone, the ministry is not an approval authority, neither is the county in this regard. The town of Orangeville stands alone in its ability to be able to render a decision on this community improvement plan, as is the case for every municipality that does a CIP in the province as well. A requirement of this process is for a statutory meeting, and that is what we have this evening. So the plan has been developed sufficiently for us to be able to present to the public along with the draft CIP, which is also online for comments. And then following today's meeting, any changes will come back in the form of revisions that are agreed to by all parties. And then we will be back in front of council for hopefully an adoption. That's an important one. The next couple of slides I'll be a little bit briefer on. For everyone's benefit, a community improvement plan is a tool of the Planning Act, and it allows specifically for the bonusing of properties. So properties that are privately owned can receive grants and other forms of assistance from the municipality, which is otherwise prohibited by, so I think it's Section 106 of the Municipal Act. So in enabling this, there has to be a firm public process backed up with good research and policy in order to justify the use or potential use of public funds for bonusing individual private property owners. As a result of that, it's very important that we go through this statutory process. So in terms of just highlighting some of the, this is a busy slide, so I won't go through all of it, but in terms of what we're trying to do with the CIP, as I said, the ones which succeed are the ones that fit hand in glove with the issues that are faced by the particular community. So what are those for Orangeville? Well, Orangeville is successful. It is a growing community. It is also a community that knows that it needs to plan very effectively for its limited land area. It is experiencing the natural evolution of growth, which includes some increased density. It's also a particularly environmentally sensitive area with the need for protection of groundwater, source protection in what we're doing. It is also an active industrial community in the sense of an existing business park that's been successful and is otherwise strategically placed. So what you will see around the province is that community improvement plans don't just focus on literally rehabilitation of buildings or neighborhoods that are facing some disinvestment. What you see that is plans used to support economic development. And what do we mean by economic development in terms of the town? Well, there on the right-hand side, you can see high quality urban design. You know, Broadway is a selling point for the town. It's got tremendous heritage, and that is part of the plan as well. Obviously, there is a tourism opportunity here in its own right, as well as Orangeville being a service economy for tourism to the north of the town as well. And in terms of more general goals, there are some cases where, you know, the building stock is older, needs to be renewed, and these plans can offer the kind of bread and butter opportunities to improve properties. And that's really what your existing CIP, and that's just for everyone's benefit. Remember, there is an existing community improvement plan which is in operation in the town. So as I mentioned, because it's a statutory process which designates an area which at the municipality's discretion could see some bonusing of properties in the form of grants for applications which are deemed to be in the public interest. It's important that firstly we identify a community improvement project area. And so historically there had been several of these. And what we have done this time, just so everyone is aware, is that we have designated the entirety of the town as a community improvement plan area. Actually, it should be titled there, a community improvement project area under the legislation. And that is something that is quite typical. It never used to be, but increasingly municipalities will designate the entirety of their areas that are covered by an official plan in order to be able to give themselves the flexibility going forward. There are a couple of programs that we're putting forward that will focus on the entirety of the town, and they're appropriately scaled for a specific purpose. But we have, as you can see on the plan there, two areas that the majority of the programs speak to specifically. And that firstly is Zone 1, which is the Central Business District, but it's a little bit different. It's the Broadway area and parts of First Street. Those little black specks that you might be able to see on screen there are in fact heritage properties. So you'll see that some of these heritage properties fall within the area and some don't. Some are out and out residential, others are more mixed use. And the focus of this plan is to focus more on commercial or non-residential uses going forward. I'll explain some of the nuance to that. And then the large area to the west, obviously, as you can see, is a Centennial Road employment area, and it is, by virtue of its location within the town, not an industrial area that's stuck out in the fringes. It's an important area of land, and I know that the town is looking at some public realm improvements through that spine, and likewise the CIP can definitely align itself to those efforts as well. So those are the two project areas that we've come up with. Very quickly, we may be able to come back to this if there are questions from council or from members of the public. But on the left-hand side, the rows there outline each of the plans. We'll go through those one by one, so I won't focus on them on this slide. But you can see what I was referring to there is that several of them would operate or are proposed to operate townwide, whereas some are focused specifically for Zone 1, which is the sort of downtown area, and Zone 2 is the employment area. So let's just take a quick peek at that. So in terms of facade improvement, That's not really a focus of the employment areas. It certainly is for the Broadway and First Street area. However, speaking to the issue of improving the look and feel and functionality of some of the employment area, a landscape improvement program, which is quite robust, is focused on that area specifically. Major building improvement and conversion grants. This speaks to the existence of a number of obviously century old buildings, great block to block building massing. Some have had significant improvement to them already. Others need some TLC in terms of their upper floors. All of them have great potential, and the potential here is to grant improvements within these buildings that have to be very carefully monitored, because you're not simply providing funds for any kind of interior building improvement. It has to be one that is going to sustain the building going forward, so it's not just normal repair and maintenance. The signature project there, tax increment grant, I'll come back to talk about that a bit later, but its focus is town-wide as it relates to contaminated land cleanup, to the extent there is contamination, or in this case affordable housing. I'll speak about that a little bit later as well. Other than that, the tax increment grant program is actually not organized for properties that might be redevelopment within the Broadway First Street area. It is specifically to the employment area. And then planning fees, and others also relate to town-wide. An accessibility program was deemed to be important. That is town-wide, but then there are some provisions in the other areas. And industrial and commercial DC related program is on the books as well there. So just going through each of these programs, there's a lot of information on these slides, and so I won't focus all of it, but on all of it. But the success to date of facade improvement within the town is, I think, something that everyone should take some considerable satisfaction in, together with the public realm improvements that have occurred in that East Broadway stretch as well. The median, the wide streets in terms of sidewalks and so on. But we know there's more to do. We know when we were doing the consultation for this, there is a plan that is there for improvement of the sidewalks as well. There's also the potential for improving the accessibility as it relates to getting into and out of some of these commercial properties, both in terms of the fronts of the properties and potentially the rear side as well. So this ultimately will be one of the most important programs, if not the most important program going forward. Although you've been operating a kind of a similar program, it's going to remain very, very important. Without getting into the technical details of it, it is designed to promote facade improvement on the fronts of buildings, but also where applicable, where the public is accessing the rear of the buildings, for example, that too should be subject to some improvement. And then obviously for those properties which have a prominent site on a corner, there is a potential for some assistance on side elevation work as well. So there's some top-ups there. There's also a signage grant component here, and there are some limits to it. You don't want to be entertaining applications for signage which are too small, and they're only available if it's part of a larger facade improvement. So that's going to be important to manage the staff time associated with this program. And then there is a heritage top-up as well. So the design guidelines that we're going to speak about, or Andrea will speak about a little later on, they would go hand in hand with this. One thing I can tell you from these programs is, as we run through them, it starts to get quite heavy in terms of management time for staff on this. And as much as we can write quite sophisticated CIPs or ones which have lofty aspirations, it is important to recognize that they need to be resourced from inside Town Hall. It's not just about dispersing grants, it's about getting to the point where the goals of the plan are being met, applicants know what they need to do, and the town can manage its distribution of those funds and its management of the whole process. So I do want to talk a little bit at the end about just resourcing the plan. Next one, no, I won't go into again as much detail, but this we felt for the industrial area, the employment zone for Centennial Road, an opportunity to do quite comprehensive landscape improvement. And just so everyone is aware, landscape improvement, we don't mean plantings, things which are potentially ephemeral or which are, sorry for the background noise, we don't mean anything which is essentially transient, but it would be significant. And so the dollar figures are fairly significant. A maximum grant of $20,000 per property at a 50% matching rate would mean $40,000 worth of work. Obviously, you know, that may not be seen by some as significant funding, but in the context of these kinds of programs, it's a serious proposition in terms of the amount of funding. And one of the things that staff at the town were very helpful in communicating to us was the need to make the best use of this program, given the environmental sensitivity of Orangeville in terms of protection of groundwater replenishment. So the idea of having infiltration improvements rather than hard landscaping is fundamental here, and that will be prioritized as we go forward. So supporting the town's efforts in source water protection. Major building improvement and conversion grant program. The target for this is commercial properties, as I mentioned, those older, often heritage properties in Priority Zone 1, the Broadway First Street area. Within that, priority given to heritage, commercial, office, and commercial mixed-use properties along Broadway. You will see potentially some of these commercial buildings get renovated for the upper floors for residential, and that's acceptable. That's part of the process here, and is going to provide an interesting mix of living environments. We see it elsewhere, and it should be supported. But other than that, you know, we're not assisting residential. The way it will work is the concept of a forgivable loan, which if people are not aware of this, it is technically a loan, but you earn forgiveness every year, so that if the loan, for example, were over a period of 5 years, if the owner firstly undertakes the work as required and then maintains ownership of that property and therefore is an invested owner for 5 years, they would earn forgiveness. So at the end of 5 years, the full amount, if they were to get 35,000, for example, would be deemed to be a grant. So it is a grant, but if you were to fix up the property a little bit and then flip it, for example, a year in, you would earn just 20% forgiveness, and so 80% of the loan would need to be paid back. This kind of program does work well, but it speaks again to the need to have quite a lot of care and attention paid at the management level within the town to be able to run these programs. So once everything's up and running and you've done a couple of these, then I think it's a much easier proposition. Tax increment equivalent grant for members of the public that may not be aware of it. The idea is that if you as the owner make an investment and improve substantially the assessment on the property, and therefore as a result the tax that is paid to all levels of government, then as it relates solely to that portion of the tax that is collected and used by the town of Orangeville, that could be granted back in the form of a payment every year, as long as the property owner firstly pays the taxes. It might seem counterintuitive, but this is not a tax holiday. This is not a tax cancellation. This is a grant which is equivalent to a portion of the tax increment. We've broken it out into two categories. One is employment lands. The idea is that this, if the owner, if the business that's in the building, if either of those parties were to invest in what's going on the property, more likely it would be the property owner. This is a way of generating larger amounts of grant funding that don't have to be put into a CIP reserve at the beginning. So you can see it almost as foregone revenue. They take the risk, they generate the assessment, the taxes are paid, and the municipality grants back. That's not to say that there isn't a cost to the town from providing all the services that are required to this additional development, but it has now for probably the better part of 20 years been a program that has proved successful and has resulted in many things happening in the province, from windmills to waterfront condominiums and all the points in between. The other aspect of this is affordable housing and contaminated land. A tax increment grant can be quite helpful to assist with the added costs of remediation where that is required on a site. And the goal there, the public policy goal, is that you clean up sites which are otherwise contaminated and maybe have some limitation on their developability. And then affordable housing. This plan does not include the town taking the leadership in affordable housing, but if there was a program developed by others, in other words, other public funding put forward for affordable housing, and that project was in the town of Orangeville, the town could provide a tax increment grant as its contribution to that project. So this is it seems very complicated, but again, there's lots of experience around the province in how this gets done in terms of legal agreements, and with one or two examples under your belt in terms of administration, it becomes a very steep learning curve. So it works well. Planning fees and building permit grants, very quickly. The idea is for the right kind of project in Zone 2, as well as town-wide, some assistance, minimal, but a maximum of $5,000 for any planning fees that are necessitated to enable a development, and similarly $10,000 maximum or 50%, whichever's less, for building permit grants as well. The accessibility program, there are two elements to this. Accessibility is a program that is becoming increasingly popular in CIPs around the province. So in adopting this kind of plan, should council wish to do that, this would be very much sort of the currently in line with best practice elsewhere. The idea is that the goal of meeting the AODA requirements, which was originally 2025, with that 2005 legislation, this is part of that process. And so you can't give substantial funding, and you have to recognize that accessibility is something that certainly can be rewarded in terms of some of the other grants, such as the improvement of or conversion of the commercial properties under Program 2. But here, this is a discrete program that is more workable. If an applicant only wants to deal with accessibility issues, this is a program that can be used. So town-wide, a maximum of $1,000 or 50%, whichever is less, for accessible parking signage. That's for existing properties. Any new development itself is going to have that requirement as part of the site plan approvals and ultimately building permits. But this is for properties essentially that are existing and which need to do more in the way of providing accessible parking information, as well as obviously the accessible parking stalls themselves. And then in zones 1 and 2, slightly more assistance, so up to $5,000 for a broader range of accessibility improvements, door widenings, washrooms, any number of things on that basis. So a good program. We expect it to be taken advantage of. This one is Industrial and Commercial Development Charge Deferral Interest Grant Program. That requires some explanation. So let me just break out that title. There are industrial and commercial development charges that are levied. The town does have some exemptions already, where if you provided for under the legislation, where if you're doing an expansion in situ, you can get a slight exemption, 50% of the fee, I think it is, that's chargeable on that. But there is an exemption. But to the extent that there are still charges that are liable for, excuse me, in Zone 2 for industrial and commercial development, in Zones 1 and 2, I should say, then this is an opportunity to allow for a grant which assists with A, deferral, and then B, a payment of the interest. So let me just explain that as simply as I can. Changes that came in a couple of years ago under Bill 108 initially allowed for not only affordable housing, rental housing, institutional development to be mandated the ability to do development charge payments by installment over 5 years, or in the case of non-profit affordable housing, as much as 20 years. They did not ultimately, after the issues with the pandemic created some changes to the economic landscape, they did not pursue this, though, with industrial and commercial development. So at the moment, if you choose to defer industrial and commercial development charges under the provisions of the Development Charges Act, interest should accrue. To the extent that interest can be supported through a grant, that is one that we think is important to have on the books. I know it's a complicated technical program, but the point is that industrial and commercial development charges can be high. There is an option to defer it, allowable under the Development Charges Act. This grant, which is under the Planning Act, can help with the payment of interest charges, which would accrue. So that is the point of this program, available in Zones 1 and 2. And then finally, a site assessment grant, an ESA grant, the townwide eligibility. This is a very good program that enables the problem of contamination. Now, contamination can occur on any number of sites. It can be obviously gas stations, but industrial uses, it can be dry cleaners, it can be salt domes areas, it can be snow dumps that have been municipal but then sold on, it can be auto repair shops, any number of things. There is an opportunity here to help with the transition in land use that happens over time by getting information on the environmental condition. It doesn't mean that you're funding everything. There has to be a reason to undertake an environmental assessment, and that reason comes as a result of a phase 1 environmental site assessment program, report that needs to be undertaken in advance of making an application. But if there is a requirement for a phase 2 ESA, which is where they go in and dig test pits and boreholes and can get very expensive, here's an opportunity to assist with providing some grants up to a maximum of 20,000, or you can have 2 studies and a maximum of 35,000 per project, which would, I think you'll find that is a program which is going to be used relatively rarely, but where it is used, it will be quite effective in assisting the applicant. So you've been very patient in me going through these complex details here. I'm going to lighten the load a little bit by allowing Andrea to hopefully show some pictures and not just words. So Andrea, if you could take it from here, I'll run the slides for you, but just tell me when to change slide.
Great, thank you, John. And good evening, everyone. I'm getting a funny echo. Is anyone else hearing the echo?
That's me. Sorry, I'm going to just mute myself. Yeah.
Okay. Is that better? Okay, that was going to drive me crazy. So thanks, John. And John's too polite to have corrected the agenda and his introduction, but I think he was announced as John Hicks instead of John Hack. So I'll correct for him. But I'm going to try to go through this fairly quickly because I'm sure there's lots of questions of council of the more detailed programs that John's group is proposing. But if you can go to the next slide.
Sorry, Andrew, I'm just having trouble. Oh, there we go. There we go.
Okay. After John said I don't have a lot of text, I have this slide that has a lot of text, but I'm not going to go through and read it. I think council's well aware of what design guidelines are. One thing we found at the start of this project is there are a number of guideline documents already for the town. However, as much as I think early 2000s is still only a couple of years ago, it's coming up to 17 to 20 years for some of those guideline documents. So they are getting a bit stale dated. And what we thought is this was an opportunity to sort of move towards one cohesive design guideline document as opposed to applicants being referred to sometimes 3 or 4 different documents. So the overall goal in this is for planning department to have one set of guidelines that while it's mostly focused on CIP type areas, we have added guidelines that really can apply more on a town-wide basis. So next slide. So how we've structured the guidelines is we've got some general guidelines that would apply town-wide, and I'll get into more detail on that, and then some specific or supplemental guidelines that are going to apply to either specific areas within the town or specific types of development. What we're hoping through this, and in my practice, we do a lot of private sector development, so we're used to being on the other end of working with design guidelines, and we want to make sure that this doesn't become an added frustration for applicants and developers. It's really intended to make the process more streamlined because it's going to be clear upfront what the expectations of the town are, and for the developers and applicants to understand what the town's going to be looking for, in particular if they're going to be applying for some of the various grants. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the first half of the guideline document is really divided into town-wide guidelines. And what we've shown just in the box is sort of some of the categories that we felt were really lacking in the existing guidelines, in part just given the age of them. So there's very few guidelines right now, if any, that deal with things like sustainability, accessibility, and safety. So we wanted to make sure that as part of this document, we add guidelines to deal with that. There's some fairly comprehensive heritage guidelines that exist today, but some of the guideline direction in those is a little outdated in terms of contemporary heritage thinking. So we've done a bit of an update on those as well. And then some broader guidelines in terms of how you address landscaping and site design, parking, things like that. Next slide. In terms of the specific design guidelines, we have guidelines for the downtown, the employment areas, commercial areas, mixed use development, the commercial residential transition areas within the town, and multiple residential development. So the question was asked earlier this evening about whether or not the town was going to have guidelines, and Larissa pointed out that this is going to be on the agenda later tonight. So while the CIP is more focused on non-residential development, because these are going to be used town-wide, and because we noted that there really wasn't any current design guideline direction for things like multiple residential development, so townhouses, apartments, stacked towns, and just knowing that you're going to start seeing more and more of those applications as land becomes more scarce and there's increased pressure to intensify. We wanted to make sure that the town, as part of this package, did get some guideline direction for that type of development. So that's something that's kind of evolved through this process that wasn't really in the original sort of terms of reference for this project. Next slide. So just as an example, on the downtown guidelines, some of the things that the guideline documents includes is direction about building facades, how to properly do additions, what to do. There are some properties where there's the potential for infill, like some of the vacant part or some of the parking lots in the downtown that may develop over time, signage, height, massing, and scale. And then we've gotten into some direction on the various CIP programs that apply within the downtown and what we're looking for specific to those programs. Next slide. The employment area guidelines, through the beginning phases of this project, we did a number of stakeholder meetings, including meetings with, I believe, most, if not all, of the town's various committees. And I'm going to rely on my memory here, which is not always a good idea. But I believe it was Councillor Sherwood that had mentioned when we talked about the employment areas and landscaping about whether or not that could include new entrance signage. And we thought, and apologize, Councillor Sherwood, if I have me mixed up, but I think it was you that said that. And we thought that was a very good comment, and that is something that we've brought in. There's a number of, through the employment area, a lot of really old and I'd say less than attractive signs that exist currently. So that's something that we thought would be a great complement in terms of that landscape package. And that roadway is getting updated. There will be a multi-use trail along it. So we've done some cross sections in the guidelines just showing how the landscapes can work together with the new cross section. And the images on the right are really just intended to show kind of what you've got as an existing condition on a lot of the properties where you've got no landscaping along the boulevard, and what it can look like in an employment area where you see more landscaping. Sometimes that's in the form of a bit of a berm that kind of shields the surface parking, having trees along the square, the frontage. So we've got quite a bit of direction in terms of the landscape component, but also direction in terms of if there's any new employment development or redevelopment, because currently the town does not have guidelines for industrial type development. Next slide. The town does have commercial guidelines. A lot of the guidelines that the town does have are still very relevant today. So where we thought they didn't really need to be changed, we've brought those forward into this document, but we have added some additional guidance as well. So these address things like landscaping, signage, parking, site intensification. That's one thing we're starting to see across multiple municipalities in Ontario is as the commercial sector is kind of changing almost daily, it seems. We're seeing a lot of commercial sites where they're intensifying them by either adding residential or adding additional commercial units within sites that just are finding that they don't need all of their parking. So we've provided some guideline direction for that as well. Next slide. And so on my end, that's really it. I wanted to leave space for questions, but we are working with your planning department in terms of reviewing the final draft guidelines and hoping to wrap that up this month, depending on any comments we receive tonight. And if there's specific comments, happy to answer them. But I'm guessing a lot of the questions will be more about the CIP program. So I'll pass it back over to John.
Okay, thanks very much, Andrea. That was great. And as you can see, the design guidelines are really quite substantial in terms of the things that they try and address. And it's all part of the entire process is one of achieving the goals of the municipality as it relates to the importance of design guidelines, even for areas that are newly developing as well as redeveloping. And the industrial areas, but at the same time giving clarity to the applicant. And what's not in the next steps here, but is going to be just to let everyone know the most important part of this plan is how you roll out the implementation. So I mentioned about the need to have clarity of process. The The back end of the community improvement plan document itself speaks to how we're going to go about receiving applications, development of application forms, a web presence, but then how there is the need to work with people that want to invest in the community and need the guidance. These design guidelines are a ready package, or will be, to enable that process of development control to be effective. Above and beyond that, implementing each of these programs that we've put forward and the budgets that go along with it, we've made some recommendations as to the amount of time that's available, but our experience elsewhere is a full-time position is often the best approach. So you would have a community improvement plan implementation officer their job being to manage every part of this process, from marketing to working with applicants. It is very rare that you would get an application that meets the needs of council, to be honest. In a first go, there is often a pre-consultation stage that we have been advising clients, and other clients have come to that conclusion themselves. So there is a process of having the plan developed, which is what we're doing this evening, and moving to adoption. Secondly, developing the resourcing capacity to implement it effectively. Along with that, then our marketing materials that will eventually need to be developed to not only advertise to potential property owners, but to give them clarity of what's expected. I would just note again, for everyone's benefit, these plans are discretionary instruments of council. They're statutory documents, but in terms of whether or not to use any of these programs that we've put out here, that is entirely a decision of council. You can turn them on, you can turn them off, you can fund them, you can not fund them, and you can allocate funding based on what it would be a reasonable series of criteria. But ultimately you have complete control of it. So in terms of what we need to do next, if this evening generates comments that need to be addressed in terms of the document, that's what we need to do. The plan would then be to come back to council with a final community improvement plan, which you could then adopt that evening of council. There is a requirement under the legislation to provide notice of the adoption of the plan, and to do so within 15 days of that adoption. There is, in fact, even beyond that, a 20-day appeal period should anyone ever wish to launch an appeal against the plan. We've never seen that happen, given the discretionary nature of the plans, but it is part of the legislative framework. But then once you've given notice, and assuming there is no other need to deal with any matter, the plan can be adopted along with the implementing bylaws that are required, and then everything turns to the tricky issue of implementation and how you do that effectively. So that's the next big item that would need to be addressed by town staff. So with that, I will take the presentation off screen just for everyone's benefit, and then if you need to bring it back with questions, I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Hack. It's very informative. I wasn't sure of your name because my sheet says Hick and your screen says Hack, so I was going to call you Joe.
That's fine. No problem at all. Thank you.
Councillor Sherwood, you have a question?
Yes, through the chair. Thank you, Mr. Hack. Nice to see you again. A couple of questions, and I'll ask them both quickly, or make comments quickly, and then hopefully get on to others. The first is regard to the Zone 1. I was hoping that Zone 1 could include all properties that fall within the Central Business District areas mapped, and that includes more properties to the north on First Street, I believe as far up as 99 First Street. Those people are included in the Central Business District map, as well as to the east upward just east of Highway 10, which would include Bona Vista. And that's where our the current hotel and there's a restaurant up there. They also fall within the Central Business District area. I'd like to see them included in Zone 1 if consideration could be taken into that. My next comment is regarding the facade grant application. Nice to see a slight increase. I still don't think 12,500 is enough. I would have liked to have seen that a little bit more, considering the costs of labor and materials nowadays. You know, $25,000 improvement isn't going to get you much, but it's a start, and at least it's something. I would like to see, however, if consideration could be made that it not be a one-time grant only, perhaps that could be something that we could maybe put, say, you could apply every 10 years, as we know that situations on properties deteriorate, buildings may need to be repainted, or there could be some other structural things that happen. And the fact that it's only a one-time grant is something I'd like maybe reconsidered. Those are my two comments.
I'll be happy to respond if you want, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Yes, thanks. So thank you to the councillor for the questions. So ultimately, the what's in or is not in the community improvement project area, I think can obviously be changed. So we can take that back for further discussion. We came to the conclusion after sort of quite a bit of assessment of the types of uses, recognizing that it doesn't include all of the BIA. So I think if there's a question for us to answer going forward, we need to do that pretty quickly, but it is a change that we could make. And on the facade improvement, it may be one time, and I'd have to just look at the details of what we had concluded, but the idea is that you can do it once during the life of the plan, and this plan would have a 5-year window to it. So that you would, after 5 years, you really need to refresh a plan. An idea of a 10-year plan is probably not the best idea, because you'll end up changing it anyway. So the idea would be within the 5-year period, you can have one application. So make sure it's the one that you want, do it properly. That's not to say if the plan is renewed after 5 years that you could do the same again. I don't think that would be an issue.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor McIntosh, and good evening, Mr. Hack and Ms. Sinclair. Nice to have you a part of our discussion this evening. And again, I'm always appreciative of the amount of work that has gone into your presentation, and a lot to digest, that is for sure. I have a comment and then also a question for you, Mr. Hack. The comment is pertaining to what you ended up addressing as for what I would call the implementation. And I know that we're going through this in our public discussion here, but I think the comment is I found that your reference to having, community improvement officer, whatever the official title is something for consideration. This is something that if it is to be effective, it can't be pushed onto someone's side of the desk. It has to be done properly for it to be successful. The question I have, looking at Zone 2, and I'm so pleased that Ms. Sinclair remembered Councillor Sherwood's comment about, the exterior and the size of our employment area in Zone 2, but also the signage. But was there consideration for some of those areas just a little bit west on Centennial? We also have some others that are abutting Riddell as well. So I'm just curious to find out if there was any consideration of kind of pushing that employment area, or at least under the community improvement plan, a little bit further west, or is it, of course, just designated for the red zone that you've identified? Yeah. Thanks for the question. They're kind of married together, the answers to both elements of it. As it relates to, can we expand it? We've taken the view that implementation is going to be most effectively done if we try and use the zoning bylaw that you have in terms of the designations. So the employment area is the employment area.
That's not to say there isn't a logic for things that are happening on the other side of the streets, on the fringes of the employment area. But just for right now, the idea is keep it, keep it so the definition is clear as to who should get assistance. In other words, you need to be appropriately zoned in the employment area to get that assistance. Over time, we might be able to amend some of these things. But I think, as you can see from the density of this community improvement plan, there's potentially a lot of work to be done in terms of trying to implement it. So my advice, I mean, you don't have to follow it. My advice is stick to the zoning as the best way to determine who is or is not eligible at this point. So even in zone 1, where we've come up with our boundary, and maybe that needs to change a bit, we've still said, you're not going to bonus residential properties in this plan. That's kind of the key principle here. The same for the employment.
And through your experience, would there be some consideration for somewhat of a phase 2? Because again, you do reference and acknowledge that we do have some businesses that are in that peripheral area. So that might be somewhere down the road if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to without making it a full-time job to measure the impact and come back to council. I think council will want to know how the plan is unfolding in terms of which programs are successful. And you'll know whether there are applications that are asking, what about us? And you need to look at it in the context of the plan that's been developed. But we've seen numerous cases where a successful plan, because it's successful, has led to amendments to that plan and adjustments going forward after, say, 3 or 4 years of implementation, just to tweak it. It would be a surprise to me if we got everything right from the beginning of this. There is a process for the plan to ultimately fit the needs of property owners and businesses.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hack, for your response.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I don't have any questions for you, Mr. Hack, but I'd just like to say that I think this is the kind of program that just dovetails what we're trying to achieve as a town. I think many times there's financial concerns for people, which is typically the number one piece, but number two, they typically don't know what to do either. And the very fact that we can consult with them and offer advice and also provide some sort of financial backing to beautify the town, it's exactly what the downtown area and its surrounding streets need, in my opinion. So I welcome this project. And my last comment would be is, I don't know how it would be successful, fellow councillors, if we didn't have someone to administer it. We've talked before about even the downtown improvement plan, and having a project manager was one of the ideas, for the sidewalks and trees and that sort of thing. We didn't end up doing that. But for something like this, that's as involved as what is being described by Mr. Hack, I think it behooves us to have that as future considerations as well. Otherwise, it'll get lost and not be done as efficiently as we'd all want it to. So thank you, Mr. Hack, for your presentation tonight. I enjoyed it immensely. I don't have questions, as they say, but I certainly grasped it all, which means you did a great job making us all understand. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Now, are there any questions from the public regarding this presentation? Again, if you're muted, please press *6 to unmute and go ahead and ask any questions. Are there any questions from the public? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Hack, for your presentation tonight. We'll move on to the next one. Thank you. Okay, we get to our last one here. Items 8.5 and 8.6. Again, this is the procedure that we'll be following tonight. Anyone who would like to speak to this matter, to call 1-289-801-5774. Enter conference ID number 461-085-195#. Callers are invited to provide their questions or comments following the conclusion of the presentation. Any member of the public connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Please remain muted until the chair requests comments from the public. If anyone wishes to be notified of further consideration on this topic, submit their name, phone number, mailing address, and email address to planning@orangeville.ca, or they can call 519-941-0440, extension 2254. Reference zoning bylaw housekeeping amendments. Please note any information collected will be a matter of public record. And we now have a presentation by Manager of Planning, Brandon Ward. Go ahead, Brandon.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to those who may be viewing tonight's public meeting virtually. I'm going to share my screen with you. It's a presentation outline for tonight's what is our final public meeting installment for tonight's meeting to deal with a zoning bylaw housekeeping update we're undertaking to our zoning bylaw. Here. So our zoning bylaw number 2290 has been in effect since 1990. It's been in operation for quite some time. The real intention of a zoning bylaw, it's a very prescriptive document. It's to outline specifically how you can use your land and where buildings may be placed on those lands and so forth. It really is the key document to implement our overall official plan, and in doing so, as with prescribing those land use permissions and such, it's a very prescriptive document. It is a legally enforceable document. It's the mechanism that must be complied with in order to, gain approvals for certain land uses and developments and building permits and such for those looking to make changes to their land. So it is a very important document. It's a very dynamic document in the sense that it's been amended many times over the course of its existence. Amendments come by way of both applicant initiated as well as town initiated. And town initiated amendments may be those circumstances where there's a particular issue that's arisen that the town wishes to amend the zoning bylaw to try to rectify those issues. As well as perhaps address some certain housekeeping challenges that arise just through the day-to-day use and implementation of the zoning bylaw. Process for either an applicant-initiated amendment or a town-initiated amendment is one and the same. It involves notification, a public meeting to sort of share with the public the amendments being undertaken or proposed, and request feedback. And that's really what we're here for this evening. It's not a decision-making point. It's really introductory to propose what sorts of amendments we're looking to undertake and obtain feedback. The last housekeeping update was done fairly recently. It happened in 2020, and it was purely just that, a housekeeping update to address some technical challenges with implementation and perhaps some minor inconsistencies in that within the internal workings of the bylaw that we sought to correct through that exercise. So tonight's or this amendment essentially is really in response to some issues that have arisen. I would say somewhat recently with respect to RV and trailer parking in residential areas. Council will recall a resolution passed last fall directing staff to take a closer look at the zoning bylaw with respect to RV parking permissions in residential areas, specifically as it relates to encroachments or proximity into the roadway areas and some safety concerns that arise with those sorts of issues. So as we're undertaking this review more carefully, we want to look, obviously, of course, at the trailer parking matter, but there's been a couple of other issues that have arisen that we want to use this as an opportunity to take a closer look at those areas and put forth some amendments to try to address those issues at the same time, sort of make good use of this exercise that has to be carried out. So the images in front of you show a bit of an illustration of some of the challenges that may preside with respect to RV parking. These images aren't specific examples in Orangeville, but they sort of portray the circumstances that some, perhaps may have seen in the town landscape or residential areas. The images are somewhat exaggerated, but the reality is just the simple sense of You sometimes have large RVs and they become, they're parked in perhaps close proximity to the roadway, or even perhaps a slight encroachment within, which obviously presents some safety challenges with respect to encroachment hazards themselves if they exist, but also with respect to sightline visibility and such. And this is really the issue that prompted us to take a closer look at zoning permissions with respect to trailer and RV specifically parking in residential areas. So the way the bylaw currently regulates where RVs may be parked in residential areas, it's basically three areas. It's of course one on the driveway in the front yard. Another option may be to park your RV in sort of your side yard condition. And also too, the bylaw allows for an RV to be parked in the rear yard. The bylaw does stipulate it's one RV, it's not multiple necessarily. Essentially, what it boils down to is the bylaw really does state that the only place you really can't park an RV is within a non-driveway part of your front yard. It has to be on the driveway in the front yard. Otherwise, if it can fit in your side yard or even in the rear yard, if there's a way to be able to maneuver your RV into your backyard and store it there, you can do so. So when we're taking a look at the issue about some of the encroachment concerns within the right-of-way, we wanted to get a balance between sort of generally maintaining the existing permissions for RV parking that exist broadly throughout the town. Those permissions have been in existence for quite some time, so we didn't want to be overly disruptive to those permissions, but at the same time, we wanted to put forth a realistic set of provisions that really do address this issue about encroachment and obstruction potentially within the right-of-way. So there's really two straightforward amendments we're proposing at this time. It's really this idea of putting forth a restriction to require that RVs parked in the driveway be set back at least 1.8 meters or 6 feet from the street edge. And also there's a limitation proposed with respect to the height of the RV. And that really is a consistency piece with respect to some height restrictions we currently have in place for trucks and bus parking. That's sort of allowed under certain conditions within residential areas. There's maximum height requirements for 3.5 meters actually for those vehicles. And we did a little bit of research to look at typical RV types and sizes, and I'll show that slide momentarily to show sort of the breakdown and typical size ranges to make sure we're sort of generally accommodating of typical ranges, but also not being too restrictive or non-restrictive essentially. So going forward, we felt that these were sort of reasonable provisions to this, particularly with respect to the parking setback to the roadway. We felt that 6 meters is a reasonable benchmark to a point where if you're maneuvering out of a neighboring driveway or within your driveway and you get to that point in your vehicle, the 6 foot or 1.8 meter setback point is likely going to be the point where it's going to open up suitable visibility to the street. So this slide here is sort of the breakdown I was referring to earlier about the vehicle size ranges and heights and such. We did contemplate a restriction on the depth or length of the vehicle, but we recognize that if the real issue here is with respect to proximity to the roadway, then really it shouldn't be left to a length limitation. It simply should be a matter of can the vehicle fit within the driveway. Driveways come in many different lengths throughout the town and residential areas. So long as the vehicle can fit within the driveway while maintaining that setback to the street, we felt that's a fair and appropriate provision to put forward. And it should also be noted that we did look at other municipal comparisons. There's quite a broad range out there, some very complex and restrictive approaches, or somewhat restrictive, I guess that's a matter for interpretation, but they can get very complex. We wanted to, again, sort of maintain existing permissions to the extent we can and truly look at something to just address this issue about its relationship to the public roadway. So moving on, the second issue we were going to take a look at was group home permissions. So really the provision is with respect to where they're permitted. It should be noted that group homes by definition are permitted in all residential zone categories throughout the town. There's a couple inhibiting factors that were sort of brought forward to us to consider this, and that is with respect to the definition of a group home itself. It refers to a single dwelling unit in a freestanding building. And then there's another provision in the bylaw that actually limits group homes to be within 100 meters of each other. So although they may be permitted in all different all the various residential zone categories, some of which only or don't permit detached or permit multiple units, well, that presents a bit of a conflict, because by definition and by that 100-meter limitation, it really only allows for them to be situated in single detached dwellings. And this was an issue brought forward to us actually by Community Living Dufferin representatives, is that in their efforts to secure or look for different housing concepts or unit concepts, i.e. detached or semi-detached or even townhome units, there's some efficiencies for them to operate, say, both halves of semi-detached dwelling, because they can sort of share resources and such and expand their accommodations quite efficiently. But under our current framework, that scenario wouldn't be feasible. So we wanted to take a closer look at this, and in doing so, we're recommending pretty subtle changes to the definition to more or less simplify it so that it refers to simply a resident and not this terminology about a single residence in a freestanding building. And also, when we looked at it more closely at the 100-meter separation requirement, we discovered that there really isn't any clear and obvious land use planning compatibility matters to support that 100-meter separation distance. It appears to be a matter of trying to prevent clustering of these. In speaking with Community Living Dufferin representatives, they felt that, yes, it's desirable to operate, say, 2 units in tandem, but they also seek to sort of disperse themselves throughout the community so they can be well integrated and share access to amenities and such that just as many other residential areas also benefit from as well. So we didn't feel there's a need to maintain that 100-meter separation requirement and recommend that it be removed from the bylaw. The final issue we wanted to take a closer look at is this concept with respect to really commercial trucks, trailers, and just generally storage in industrial areas. The issue really has been there's a propensity or a prospect for sort of vacant or underutilized properties in our general industrial or our employment areas, for them to potentially be underutilized solely for vehicle parking or other storage purposes. This is a difficult balance because, albeit those sorts of uses are appropriate for the industrial location, they really are an underutilization of these properties. They're fully serviced, they're within our urban area, and there's a growing policy direction to make more efficient utilization of those lands and really boost the job density to the extent we can. So we thought taking a closer look at this would be prudent. And in doing so, we're suggesting that make some adjustments to these definitions to basically do 2 things. One is, right now, the definitions are pretty vague. They simply refer to these concepts of a truck or bus storage terminal or a vehicle storage facility as simply being a place where sort of these activities preside. That could be a lot in its entirety. That could be a lot in combination with another use, et cetera. We wanted to be explicit in that these uses only include the use itself as well as also a building. And this is sort of the last slide before you that describes sort of the changes we're proposing to make, that these definitions would be amended so that they state the use includes a building, and the building contains some sort of business venture associated with that truck or bus storage terminal or vehicle storage facility. And to ensure that the building is of meaningful substance, you don't have necessarily like a kiosk on the property to sort of satisfy that requirement and not really uphold that objective. We put forth a minimum floor area requirement that, we didn't necessarily pick that arbitrarily. We did some research and looking at our current built up lands and trying to assess what generally building areas look like in our industrial area, but also looked at other municipal comparable approaches to this. And then finally, there's a comment here about just ensuring there's some consistent terminology made throughout the bylaw. There's different references to open storage or open display, et cetera. We just want to make sure the terminology in that respect is simplified and consistent going forward. Those are really the three areas we wanted to take a look at as part of this exercise. Next steps going forward is first and foremost is to take any input received at tonight's meeting back into consideration. We did circulate this to key internal divisions and external agencies for comment. To date, we don't have much feedback, and admittedly, that's of no real surprise, just given the very specific scope and nature of the amendments we're proposing at this time. We'll continue to have dialogue with internal divisions. We've consulted with our bylaw division just to make sure that to get a sense of enforceability with respect to some of the amendments we're contemplating. We'll also have further dialogue with our public works staff with respect to any adjustments that may be needed to the traffic bylaw with respect to that relationship with RV parking relative to the roadway and such. So ultimately, once that's concluded, we'll bring forward a recommendation report with a final bylaw amendment for consideration. Our hope is that will be done in June, but again, that will largely depend on sort of the outcome of tonight's meeting and what sort of feedback we get through the remaining process. Concludes my presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen, and my contact information is up here as well as it's in the tonight's agenda. So if there's any questions or submissions to be made outside of this meeting, you can feel free to send them to my attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Could you go back to the picture of the RV, please? If that's possible. Yeah, the other one that had the measurements. 1.8 meters. Okay. So 1.8 meters, that seems quite a bit. I just worry that we're going a little bit too much with this. If we restrict it so much, we might as well ban it. That's my concern. So I'm just not sure if the 1.8
my contact information is up here as well as it's in the tonight's agenda. So if there's any questions or submissions to be made outside of this meeting, you can feel free to send them to my attention. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Could you go back to the picture of the RV?
I think we have someone that's also connected, and they're playing back tonight's meeting on delay.
Okay. Yeah, that's my only comment on the RV. I'd have to think about that, the 1.8 meter. We don't want to restrict it so much that people can't park their RVs. We want to keep it, I call it common sense, but, and again, if there's a sidewalk there, you didn't mention sidewalks. Is there any specific distance from a sidewalk that you'd be looking at?
There is not with respect to sidewalks. My understanding is the traffic bylaw already prohibits any parking encroachment onto the sidewalk, so that's currently in force.
Okay, thank you. In regards to the tractor trailer storage, this has reared its head because I forget the name of the place that was there that burnt down the garden center. That's apparently what that is going to be, is basically a place to park your transport trucks and just leave them. That's unfortunately what that land is going to be. And my last point, is there anything do we think we need something to do with garbage dumps? I know I've had a few complaints from the public in regards to people leaving those big green bins. There's no real time limit, I don't believe, on leaving them there, and some people do take advantage and leave them there for 6 months. Has there been any thought to that?
To you, Deputy Mayor, we did look at that issue more carefully as part of the last housekeeping in 2020. I believe we put forth amendments that were approved in the bylaw that did prescribe some time restrictions, sort of. I think it was, I'd have to go back and confirm, but it may have been 90 days or 30 days in any sort of certain period of time, 6-month period. It can get a little challenging to enforce at times, but it really is there for the sense of, enforcement if there's a complaint of something presiding for quite an undue length of time. They have the ability to use that provision to go out and take enforcement action if needed.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Taylor, you had a question.
I did. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, through you to Mr. Ward. I guess I'm thinking about this trailer bylaw. I like the way it's written. I don't have any issues with what's here. I was just curious if you could speak to street parking with trailers. I know we are working on different things for street parking, but what about the trailers that park out in front of houses or in front of somebody else's house? Was that thought of in this? And because you could see if you can't get in the driveway, you'd go to the road, right? Is there any thoughts on that?
Again, through you, Deputy Mayor, to Councillor Taylor, it's not specifically addressed through this. This is a zoning bylaw. It's looking at land use on private land. So something like that, if there's a concern about RV parking in the public right-of-way, that really would be more of a traffic bylaw matter. And I don't know the details offhand about restrictiveness around that issue. We'd have to take a closer look at that.
Okay. If I may, would Mr. Koslak's on the line, would he be able to provide that? Because I think we want to address the entire issue, right? And it really is obstructing views and causing congestion in communities. And if it's okay by you, Deputy Mayor, could we have Mr. Koslak provide some information?
Mr. Koslak.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, frankly, I don't have that. I'd have to confer with clerks and check the bylaw. I'm going from memory. I believe there's a time restriction on the length of time you can park on the street, but I don't know what that is off the top of my head. I can endeavor to get that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Ken?
I can provide some details with respect to the size of a vehicle on the road. So there is the current restriction in the traffic bylaw under section 3.9 is that the size of the vehicle is to be no longer than 7 meters in length and 3.5 meters in height. And then there is an exception with respect to school buses. They're allowed to park on the road between Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. for a maximum of 3 hours at any particular time.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Thank you, Mr. Ward, for being a part of our evening here. Two questions, and this is to piggyback on Councillor Taylor's comment, and if I'm correct in addressing the trailers, when we are referencing trailer and RV parking, when I'm looking at utility trailers, some may not necessarily be high, but some can be long. Would this apply to that, if I'm correct in saying so?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I believe through this provision, it's only looking specifically at the RV parking, not necessarily utility trailers. If that is a concern, it is something we could take a look at as well.
Okay. My second question is referencing the truck area, the truck storage. More of an observation outside of our municipality, and I know that the Deputy Mayor referenced some, I guess, revitalization of a particular property. This would be pertaining to shipping containers. And shipping containers, of course, are part of the logistics world, some of which, reside on certain areas a lot longer than a trailer, but they also end up sometimes being stacked and several shipping containers high. Was there consideration for something like that? Because I didn't see anything in the documentation. And why I reference this is there's an example, and again, I'm not saying that this is correct, but it just happens to be a personal observation. Highway 50 south of Bolton on the east side, there is a stack of shipping containers, and it may be allowed in that particular area, but they must be 5 or 6 high. And aesthetically, it is not the most pleasing view when you're heading down that route. And heaven forbid that we have something like that potentially happen in our community. I know that we have maybe a more realistic view on how we're moving ahead with this, but it was just a comment and a question pertaining to shipping containers.
Yeah, through you, Deputy Mayor, to Councillor Andrews, the shipping container issue isn't something we took a real careful look at as part of this. We were looking more holistically at the land use in terms of open storage and vehicle parking. Shipping containers would probably fall in alignment with the open storage piece. So we just our changes in that realm, we're really looking at consistent terminology. And
that's why I referenced it, because of the storage facilities, because they may be used for a variety of purposes. They may be for permanent storage, temporary storage, or maybe for the sake of shipping, whatever the product may be. But just wanted to make a comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Ward. Will it be clearly defined in the proposed amendment regarding the travel trailers or the RVs that the 1.8 meter will start from the tongue of the trailer to the curb and not from the front of the trailer? So if I look at your picture, the tongue comes out quite a few feet more than the front of the trailer itself. And, people could still walk and trip over that if it's getting close to a sidewalk. So is it pretty specific that it'll be from the tongue out? And then I have one more comment.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Councillor Sherwood, this doesn't address the sidewalk piece. That is already addressed by the traffic bylaw. This is with respect to proximity to the road edge. And by terminology, it's not distinguishable as exclusive of the tongue and hitch, etc. So in interpreting that, it would be all inclusive, unlike the height provision that does exclude certain, fixtures with the trailer. It's really dealing with the bulk of it. The encroachment would speak to any and all aspects of the trailer, and we can add emphasis to that for clarity if need be.
Yeah, I think that could be important, in my opinion, because that hitch part does come out significantly if I look at that one particular photograph. My other comment is regarding the truck and trailer storage in industrial areas. Will this be treated as, for taxation purposes, as full industrial, or will it be taxed at the industrial vacant rate? I feel it should be treated as a full industrial tax class.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, again to Councillor Sherwood, I'm not certain what the implications are for zoning permissions relative to tax assessment. My understanding is tax assessment is more a product of what exists on the lands. And going forward with this provision, it's sort of compelling more than just trailer and vehicle storage. It's compelling or obligating a building to form part of that. So if there's any implications of assessment along those lines, I think it would be more probably going with your suggestion, Councillor Sherwood.
Yeah, hopefully it would be treated as a business and be full industrial rate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sherwood. No more questions from council. We'll move on to public. If there's anyone from the public has a question, please press *6 to unmute and go ahead and ask your question. Hearing nobody, we need a motion to receive tonight's. Councillor Sherwood, Mayor Brown, all in favor? It's unanimous. Mayor Brown will now resume the chair. Thank you very much.
All right, not much left here, folks. 9.1, a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of Council of the Corporation of Town of Orangeville at its council public meeting held on May the 9th. We have a motion on that bylaw, please. Councillor Post, second by Councillor Peters, all in favor? And a motion to adjourn. Councillor Taylor, second by Councillor Andrews, all in favor? All right, folks. Have a great evening.
Night all.
Good night, everyone. Night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.